What happens when a perfect life is built on a catastrophic lie? Bailey Bishop had everything: a sprawling Greenwich estate, a charismatic billionaire husband, and a place at the pinnacle of society. But her husband, Marcus Thorne, had a secret with blonde hair, endless legs, and a name, Serafina. When Bailey caught them in their penthouse apartment, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned around, walked out, and vanished from the face of the earth. But it's the letter she left behind, a letter sent not to her husband, but to the world, that ignited a firestorm, destroying an empire and turning a society wife into a legend. The air in Greenwich, Connecticut, smelled of old money and freshly cut grass. From the outside, the estate of Marcus and Bailey Bishop was the very definition of success. It was a sprawling, ivy-covered Georgian mansion that sat on 12 acres of woodland, a monument of stone and glass that seemed to rise organically from the landscape. Inside, Bailey Bishop was adjusting a stem of white orchid in a Ming vase. Everything in her home was perfect, curated with a precision that bordered on the sterile. Bailey herself was like that, pale blonde, elegant, and possessed of a stillness that people often mistook for fragility. She was the perfect wife for a man like Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the sun to her moon. He was dark-haired, charismatic, and vibrating with an energy that dominated every room. He was the founder and CEO of Thorne Dynamo, a green energy company that had promised to solve the climate crisis with its revolutionary Helios core technology. He was lauded on magazine covers as the Tesla of the East Coast, the man who was making sustainable energy not just viable, but profitable and sexy. Tonight was the annual Future Forward Gala, the largest fundraising event for the Thorne Foundation and the undisputed highlight of the Greenwich social calendar. Bailey, as always, was the silent engine behind the event. She had curated the guest list, tasted the food, and approved the seating chart, ensuring rival investors were seated far apart. Marcus found her in the grand hall, tapping at her tablet. He kissed the top of her head, his scent, expensive cologne, and ozone washing over her. "It's perfect, Bailey, as always," he said, his voice a low, appreciative hum. He glanced at his phone, his thumb swiping rapidly. "Arthur Langdon just confirmed the Japanese consortium is in. They're buying another 5%. "That's wonderful, Marcus," Bailey said, her voice quiet. Arthur Langdon was Marcus's CFO, a man with sharp eyes and a shark's smile. "Wonderful. It's revolutionary, darling." He finally looked at her, his smile bright and blinding. "Tonight, we're not just throwing a party. We're announcing the future." He held her by the shoulders, his eyes intense. "In 2 years, Bailey the Helios core will be in every city. This party, it's nothing. We'll buy an island." She smiled, a small, practiced tilt of her lips. "Don't forget the press at 7:15. And your speech. You did review the notes I made." Of course," he said, already distracted by another ping from his phone. "It's just this new campaign. It's vital." Bailey's gaze lingered on his screen for a fraction of a second too long. She saw the name. Serafina. Serafina Vance. The new face of Thorne Dynamo. A model with eyes the color of the Caribbean and a body that seemed to defy gravity. Marcus had been insistent on hiring her, claiming she represented the youthful, vibrant energy of the brand. Bailey had met her. Serafina was all teeth and ambition, a woman who looked at Marcus not with admiration, but with a hunger that was chillingly familiar. It was the same look Marcus got when he was about to close a deal. "I have to take this," Marcus said, already walking away. "It's about the PR rollout for Serafina's shoot. Vital." Bailey stood alone in the cavernous hall. The house was silent save for the distant hum of the catering trucks. She looked at the perfect orchids, the polished marble, and the gilded frames of their perfect life. For the first time, she noticed the faint hairline crack that was spreading from the corner of the vase. She had built this cage. She had polished the bars and locked the door. She had been the perfect supportive wife, the one who had given up her own career to manage his life, his home, and his social standing. Before she was Bailey Bishop, society hostess, she had been Bailey Hayes, forensic accountant, a woman who could find a single falsified decimal point in a mountain of data. A woman who saw patterns where others saw chaos. And she was seeing a pattern now. The late-night meetings, the sudden whispered phone calls, the new encrypted laptop he kept in his briefcase, and the name Serafina, which appeared on his phone with the frequency of a stock ticker. She had ignored it, telling herself it was the price of admission for a man like Marcus. But as she stood in the silence, a cold, hard knot of certainty tightened in her stomach. It wasn't just infidelity. Infidelity was common. This felt different. This felt expensive. She walked to the large French doors and looked out at the grounds. The party would begin in 3 hours. She would smile, she would wear the sapphire gown Marcus had bought her, and she would play the part of the perfect wife. But as she watched the sun dip below the trees, Bailey Bishop made a decision. She wasn't just going to look for the crack. She was going to find out what was causing it. The gala was a resounding success. Marcus was brilliant, his speech painting a vision of a clean, bright future, all powered by Thorn Dynamo. He raised over $20 million for the foundation. Serafina Vance was there, draped in silver, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes and touching his arm a little too often. Bailey watched it all with a serene, fixed smile, accepting compliments on the peonies and the perfection of the sea bass. But her mind was elsewhere. It was on the encrypted laptop in Marcus's study. For the next 2 weeks, Bailey operated in the shadows of her own home. She became a ghost, her movements timed to his. She slept when he was at the office, and she worked when he was asleep. Her former life, the one of meticulous, obsessive detail, came rushing back. She was no fool. She didn't try to guess his password. Marcus was arrogant, but not stupid. Instead, she used a small USB keylogger she'd purchased under a false name. She planted it in the back of his desktop docking station one morning while he was in the shower. She waited 3 days. Then while he was at a board dinner, a dinner she knew via his car's tracker was at a downtown penthouse he kept for investors, she retrieved the drive. She didn't use her own computer. She went to the guest house to a machine she had purchased for cash and set up on a dedicated, untraceable internet connection. The file from the keylogger opened. It was a jumble of keystrokes. It took her an hour to sift through the noise to find the string of 24 characters he had used to access the encrypted laptop. Her fingers trembled as she typed it in. Helios Invictus 1025. The drive mounted. At first, it was what she expected. Memos, marketing plans, contracts. Then she found the folder labeled Personal. Inside a subfolder, SV. It was a flood. Photos, videos, hotel bookings. Serafina Vance, not in the professional high-fashion shots from the campaign, but in hotel robes in his car, on his private jet. It was sordid and undeniable. Bailey felt a brief, cold sting, but she brushed it aside. This was just the symptom. She was looking for the disease. She left the SV folder and went deeper into the core financials. Marcus had always kept her separate from the real business, letting her manage the household books and the foundation, but never Thorn Dynamo itself. He said it was to protect her. She knew it was to control her. She opened a folder named Internal R&D. She found what she was looking for, not in a spreadsheet, but in a long chain of increasingly frantic emails between Marcus and a man she didn't know, a Dr. Evan Reed, former head of engineering. The first email, dated 6 months ago, was from Dr. Reed. Subject: urgent. Helios core instability. Marcus. The test results from the Nevada plant are not just disappointing, they are catastrophic. The core is not holding a sustained charge. The output is 30% of what we've promised investors, and the containment field is showing stress fractures. We are faking the public data. This is not a bug. It's a fundamental design flaw. We have to halt the rollout and tell the board. Marcus's reply was ice cold. Evan, you are overreacting. The data is managed, not faked. We are in a delicate phase of investor confidence. Your job is to fix it, not to panic. Keep this between us. The chain continued for weeks. Dr. Reed becoming more desperate, Marcus becoming more threatening. The final email was from Arthur Langdon, the CFO, sent to Marcus. Subject: the Reed problem. It's handled. His severance package includes a non-disclosure agreement, so ironclad, he won't be able to order a coffee without my permission. He's gone. I've promoted his number 2, who understands team loyalty. Bailey's blood ran cold. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just cutting corners. This was a multi-billion-dollar fraud. Thorn Dynamo, the company that was supposed to save the world, was a house of cards. The Helios core was a lie. She kept digging. She found the real money trail. A shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, SV Holdings. She had assumed SV stood for Serafina Vance. It did. But it was worse than she thought. Marcus wasn't just paying for his mistress. He was laundering money through her. He had awarded Serafina's modeling agency, a company she'd founded 3 months ago, an exclusive $50 million marketing contract. From there, the money was being funneled from SV Holdings into private offshore accounts. He wasn't just cheating on Bailey. He was cheating the company, siphoning off investor capital into a personal slush fund, using his mistress as the cutout. He was planning to cash out. The stock was at its peak. He was preparing for a massive final round of funding, after which he and Arthur Langdon would sell their shares, leaving everyone else, including the Japanese consortium and the pension funds that had invested, with nothing but a worthless, unstable piece of metal. And Serafina was his accomplice. Bailey sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating her pale, shocked face. The guest house was silent. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had betrayed everyone. He was a thief dressed in the clothing of a savior. She looked at the evidence, the emails, the bank transfers, the real unfiltered test data from the Nevada plant. She understood. Marcus knew the core was a failure. He was just trying to keep the lie going long enough to get rich. He would ruin thousands of lives. She thought about going to the board. But who on the board was clean Arthur Langdon? He was in on it. The others. They were so blinded by the stock price they'd never believe her. They would side with Marcus, and he would crush her. He would use the photos from the SV folder, paint her as a hysterical, jealous wife, and have her committed. No. She couldn't fight him in his world. She couldn't win in a boardroom or a courtroom. He owned the lawyers, the PR firms, and he thought he owned her. She looked at the drive in her hand. He had built his empire on lies. She would use the truth to tear it down. But first she had to disappear. And to do that, she had to control the narrative of why she was leaving. The fraud was the weapon, but the affair was the motive. She had to be the wronged wife, not the forensic accountant whistleblower. The world understood a woman scorned. It was the perfect cover. Her plan began to form, cold, meticulous, and precise. She wasn't just going to leave him. She was going to excavate him. Bailey Bishop spent the next month living a double life with chilling precision. By day, she was the dutiful, if slightly distant, Mrs. Thorne. She organized his dinners, scheduled his appointments, and nodded serenely when he told her he'd be working late. By night, she was Bailey Hayes, the analyst. She didn't just copy the files from his encrypted drive. She downloaded everything. The company's entire financial history, the falsified engineering reports, the secret contracts, and the damning email chains. She duplicated them onto 5 separate encrypted military-grade hard drives. Next, she began the slow, methodical process of liquidation. She had maintained her own brokerage account from her pre-marriage days. She had been a savvy investor. Over the years, she had also been the primary manager of their household accounts, which Marcus in his arrogance saw as play money, but which she had grown into a substantial 7-figure sum. She began moving assets not in large, suspicious chunks, but in a quiet, steady stream. She transferred the funds through a series of shell corporations she'd built herself over the past 2 weeks, ending in a secure, anonymous bank in Switzerland. A bank that valued privacy above all. She was careful. She took only what was legally hers, her own investments, the money she'd inherited, and the pre-stipulated amount from their prenup. She left his money, the money from Thorne Dynamo, untouched. She wasn't a thief. She was a witness. She secured a new passport and identity. It was expensive dealing with specialists in the digital dark arts, but she paid in untraceable cryptocurrency. She was no longer Bailey Bishop. She was to become Anna Kessler, a German art historian. She studied Marcus's calendar. She knew he kept a penthouse at the new, obscenely expensive 111 West 57th Street in Manhattan. He'd told her it was for entertaining foreign investors. Her tracking of his credit cards told her it was for entertaining Serafina Vance. She found the date, Friday, June 10th. He had told her he was flying to Tokyo for an emergency meeting with the consortium. His flight records, which she'd accessed via his travel rewards account, showed he was flying nowhere. His calendar, however, showed a 7 p.m. reservation at Per Se and a $5,000 order from a high-end lingerie boutique to be delivered to the penthouse. That was the day. She spent that Friday finalizing her exit. The 5 hard drives were packaged. One was sent by secure courier to a bank vault in Zurich. One to a law firm in London she had vetted with a dead man's switch instruction. If you do not hear from me by the 1st of every month, deliver this package to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The remaining 3 were for later. At 6:00 p.m. she left the Greenwich estate. She didn't pack a bag. She left her clothes in the closet, her jewelry in the safe, her phone on the kitchen counter. She walked out wearing a simple black dress, carrying only a purse. Her car was left in the garage. She took a prepaid car service into Manhattan. At 7:30 p.m., she walked into the shimmering lobby of 111 West 57th Street. She didn't need a key. She knew the code to the private elevator. Marcus was sloppy. He used the company's founding date. 0815. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The scene was exactly as she had pictured. The skyline of Manhattan glittered behind them like a million judging eyes. Champagne glasses were on the marble bar. Music was playing. Marcus was in a silk robe, his back to her, pouring another drink. Serafina Vance was draped on the white sofa wearing the lingerie from the 7 p.m. delivery. They both froze. Serafina's mouth opened in a silent, perfect O of shock. Marcus spun around his face a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into fury. "Bailey, what the hell are you? How did you get in here?" This was the moment, the pivot point of her entire life. She was supposed to scream, to cry, to throw the champagne bottle. This was the scene he expected. Bailey Bishop did none of those things. She stood perfectly still in the entryway, her purse held in front of her. She looked at Marcus, her gaze flat and devoid of any emotion. She looked at Serafina, taking in the scene with the dispassionate air of an inspector. "Bailey, I can explain," Marcus stammered, taking a step forward, holding his hands up. "Can you—" Bailey's voice was quiet, but it cut through the music. "She means nothing to me, Bailey. It was a mistake, a stupidity. It's the pressure, the business." Bailey let the silence hang. She watched him squirm, this great man, this savior, reduced to the most pathetic cliché in the book. Serafina, recovering her composure, stood up, clutching the silk robe around her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hard. Bailey finally moved. She walked past Marcus, ignoring him completely. She went to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city. "It's a beautiful view," Bailey said. "All of it, built on sand." "Bailey, listen to me." Marcus pleaded, his voice now tight with irritation. "Let's go home. We can talk about this. We can fix this." Bailey turned to face him. Her expression was one of profound, bottomless pity. "Fix it," she said. "Oh, Marcus, you can't fix this." She looked at Serafina. "He's been lying to you too, you know. That $50 million marketing contract, that isn't for you. It's for him. SV Holdings is his escape hatch. You're just the packaging." Serafina's face went white. Marcus's panic turned to ice. The jig was up, but not the one he thought. What have you been doing, Bailey, snooping in my affairs?" "Affairs, yes," Bailey said. "Both kinds." She turned back to the door. "Bailey, you are not walking out on me," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing in the minimalist room. "You are nothing without me. I made you. You walk out that door, I will destroy you. I will leave you with nothing." Bailey paused at the elevator, her hand on the call button. She turned, and for the first time she smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow thing. "You're right, Marcus. I am leaving you with nothing." She stepped into the elevator. "Bailey!" he roared, lunging for the closing doors, but they sealed shut, reflecting his furious, terrified face back at himself. The elevator descended smooth and silent. Bailey Bishop walked out of the lobby into the warm June night and vanished. Marcus Thorne's fury lasted for exactly 12 hours. He tore the penthouse apart, screaming at Serafina to get dressed and get out. He drove back to Greenwich at 2 a.m, half expecting to find Bailey there with a fleet of lawyers. The house was dark, silent. He stormed into their bedroom. "Bailey?" Nothing. Her clothes were in the closet. Her wedding ring was on the nightstand, placed neatly beside a copy of the Odyssey. He checked the study. Her laptop was there. He checked the safe. The blood drained from his face. It was empty. Not just her jewelry, not just the emergency cash. The spare checkbooks were there, but the ledgers were gone. The small black notebooks where she meticulously tracked the household finances. And the hard drives. The backup drives from his personal safe, which he'd thought were secure. He staggered back. No. He ran to his own study. He powered up his main computer. He tried to log in to the company's secure server from his home terminal. Access denied. He tried again. Access denied. User profile M. Thorne. Privileges revoked. What is this? He tried to log into his personal offshore accounts, the ones he'd set up with Arthur Langdon. Account frozen. Pending security verification. A cold, visceral terror, an emotion Marcus hadn't felt since he was a child, gripped him. This wasn't a wife leaving. This was an extraction. He called his office. It was Saturday morning. No one answered. He called Arthur Langdon. It went straight to voicemail. He called the head of his IT department. Damien, it's Marcus. Someone has locked me out of the server. I think we've been breached. I need you to... Mr. Thorne. Damien's voice was shaky. I can't do that, sir. My access was revoked an hour ago by an alpha-level administrator. I thought it was you. Alpha level, I'm the only alpha, me and Arthur. No, sir. There was a third. An administrator account we set up for the initial build-out years ago. EH admin. It's been dormant for 6 years. It just became active an hour ago. E.H. Bailey Hayes. Marcus dropped the phone. She had built the system. He remembered now vaguely. Years ago, before Thorne Dynamo was a giant, back when they were in a tiny office in Stamford, Bailey, with her accounting background, had set up their entire financial architecture. He'd phased her out as the company grew, bringing in real executives like Langdon. He'd forgotten she still had the skeleton keys. She hadn't just copied the data. She had locked him out of his own kingdom. He spent the next 5 days in a blur of mounting panic. He couldn't call the police. What would he say? My wife ran away and took all the evidence of my corporate fraud. He couldn't call his investors. He couldn't call the board. He was blind, trapped in his own glass mansion. He was an emperor with no clothes, and he was beginning to realize no empire. He hired a private investigator, a brutal, expensive man named Gavin Rook, who specialized in discreet retrievals. "Find her," Marcus growled, pacing his study. "She's unstable, hysterical. She took things that don't belong to her." Rook was unimpressed. "She took money. She took data. Sensitive data. Proprietary. And she's your wife. So she's angry. She'll be at a spa in Arizona or a friend's place in the Hamptons. She'll run out of money and come back." "You don't understand," Marcus hissed, his hands shaking. "You need to find her now." For a week, there was nothing. Rook's team hit brick walls. Bailey Bishop had not used a credit card. She had not used her passport. Her phone was still on the kitchen counter. She did not exist. Then on the 8th day after her disappearance, Marcus Thorne's world ended. It didn't start with a phone call. It started with a sound. The sound of a helicopter. He looked out his window and saw a black, unmarked helicopter landing on his perfect front lawn. Men in dark suits with FBI and SEC emblazoned on their vests poured out. At the same time, the gates to his estate, the gates she had the codes for, swung open, and a convoy of black SUVs sped up the driveway. His phone began to scream. It was Arthur Langdon. "Marcus, they're here. The feds are everywhere. They're raiding the office. They have warrants." Marcus stood frozen, his coffee cup slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. A sharp, metallic rap echoed through the hall. "Mr. Marcus Thorne, this is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest." He didn't move. He just stared at the front door as it was breached, splintering off its hinges. Where was she? How could this? And then his personal assistant, hysterical, called him. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, the letter. It's everywhere. It's on the news. The Wall Street Journal. The New York Times. Oh my God. Mr. Thorne, what did you do?" The letter did not arrive by email at 9:01 a.m. That morning, precisely as the stock market opened, simultaneous packages were delivered by bonded courier to the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, the head of the SEC's Enforcement Division, and the Attorney General for the Southern District of New York. Each package contained 2 items: a slim 12-page bound letter and a single black encrypted hard drive. The letter was printed on thick watermarked paper. The title on the front, in simple, elegant serif font, read, "An open letter regarding the insolvency and criminal fraud of Thorne Dynamo Inc." It began, "To the investors, employees, and the public trust, my name is Bailey Hayes Bishop. For the past decade, I have been the wife of Marcus Thorne, the celebrated founder of Thorne Dynamo. While the world knew me as a hostess, my husband knew me as his first accountant. It was I who built the financial architecture of his company. It was an architecture he later used not to build a future, but to orchestrate one of the largest corporate deceptions in modern history. I am writing this letter because I can no longer be complicit through my silence in this fraud. Thorne Dynamo is a lie. The Helios core does not work." The letter was not a jilted wife's emotional rant. It was a cold forensic execution. In precise numbered sections, Bailey laid out the entire conspiracy. She detailed the Reed problem, including the suppressed engineering reports from Dr. Evan Reed, who she noted was fired and silenced for telling the truth. She detailed the falsified data that was being fed to investors, showing a 300% performance exaggeration. She detailed the shell corporation SV Holdings and its true purpose. She named Serafina Vance not as a mistress, but as an unindicted co-conspirator in a scheme to launder stolen investor capital. She detailed the imminent plan by Marcus Thorne and CFO Arthur Langdon to initiate a final round of funding, which they intended to use as exit liquidity before selling their shares and bankrupting the company. "Mr. Thorne's infidelity," she wrote in a chilling paragraph, "is a personal matter, but his use of his mistress, Miss Vance, to create a $50 million shell corporation to steal from his own shareholders is a federal crime. The affair was merely a symptom of his true pathology, a pathological greed that has poisoned his company from the root." The Wall Street Journal editor, a woman named Clara Jensen, read the letter with her heart in her throat. It was the biggest story of the year, possibly the decade. It was Enron Madoff and Theranos rolled into one. Get me everyone," Clara stammered to her assistant. "Get our tech team, our legal team, and our financial crimes unit. Now. We have to verify this." They didn't have to wait long. At the bottom of the letter was the final devastating blow. "The enclosed hard drive," Bailey wrote, "contains the entirety of Thorne Dynamo's internal servers. It includes the original unaltered engineering data from the Nevada plant, the full email and text message history of Mr. Thorne and Mr. Langdon, and the complete unredacted bank records from SV Holdings and their associated offshore accounts. The password for the drive is Dreven Reed was right. I have taken these steps because I am in fear for my life. Marcus Thorne is a powerful, vindictive man, and the men he associates with are dangerous. I have disappeared. I am in a safe location, and I have taken precautions. Multiple copies of this drive are in secure locations across the globe. Should any harm come to me, or should any attempt be made to suppress this investigation, the full unencrypted contents of the drive, including materials not provided to you, will be released to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency worldwide. I urge you to act quickly. The market is open, and investors are still buying a lie. It was signed simply, Bailey H. Bishop. The journal didn't even have time to publish. The SEC, moving with a speed that shattered all bureaucratic records, had already seen enough. The letter combined with the drive was not just a smoking gun. It was a full confession, complete with appendices. They hit the sell button on Thorne Dynamo's stock, halting all trading. But it was too late. The news had leaked from inside the SEC. In 12 minutes, Thorne Dynamo's stock, once the darling of the S&P 500, flatlined. It went from $450 a share to $12, then to zero. The headlines were instantaneous and brutal. Thorne Dynamo. CEO arrested in FBI raider. The Bishop letter vanished. Wife exposes multi-billion-dollar Helios fraud, Helios Core. A hoax whistleblower wife claims model Serafina Vance implicated in Thorne conspiracy. By noon, Bailey Bishop was the #1 trending topic in the world. She was the vanished wife, the whistleblower ghost. Marcus Thorne, the man who was going to save the world, was led out of his Greenwich mansion in handcuffs, his face a mask of stunned, uncomprehending rage. The fallout was a nuclear winter. The collapse of Thorne Dynamo wiped out an estimated $70 billion in market value. Pension funds, university endowments, and tens of thousands of retail investors were ruined. The Japanese consortium Marcus had been so proud of was facing financial ruin. The case became the trial of the decade. The US government, humiliated by the scale of the fraud, threw every available resource at it. Arthur Langdon, the shark-eyed CFO, was the first to flip. Faced with life in prison, he agreed to testify against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony painted a portrait of Marcus as a narcissistic mastermind who bullied his subordinates into compliance. Serafina Vance was next. Her high-powered lawyers tried to paint her as another one of Marcus's victims, a naive girl duped by a powerful man. That narrative held until the prosecution produced the bank records from SV Holdings, showing wire transfers from her account to purchase a villa in Lake Como and a $3 million diamond. She too testified, claiming Marcus had forced her to participate. No one believed her. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. But the star witness was one who never appeared. Bailey Bishop. Her letter was the centerpiece of the trial. Her hard drive was the prosecution's entire case. The defense team, led by a high-priced lawyer named Benjamin Croft, tried to have her evidence thrown out. "This is inadmissible," Croft argued. "It is the fruit of a poisoned tree. This is evidence stolen by a vindictive, jealous wife. She broke into his computer. She stole his private property. This is a revenge fantasy, not a legal case." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Tricia Warren, overruled him. "Mr. Croft, your client, is accused of defrauding the public of $70 billion. The The private property you're referring to is evidence of that crime. The source's motive, be it jealousy, civic duty, or a love of opera, is irrelevant. The evidence is the evidence. It stands. The trial was a circus. The key email to Dreven Reed was right became a national catchphrase. Dr. Evan Reed himself was brought in to testify, a quiet, broken man who finally got to tell his truth. He explained in devastating technical detail how the Helios core was a physical impossibility and how his data had been systematically altered. Marcus Thorne's defense was pure arrogance. He testified that Bailey was unstable, that Dr. Reed was a disgruntled employee, that Arthur Langdon was the real mastermind. He claimed he was a visionary, not an accountant, and that he was unaware of the day-to-day minutiae. The prosecution's closing argument lasted 2 hours. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Marcus Thorne was found guilty on all 28 counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. At the sentencing, Marcus, finally broken, wept and begged the judge for mercy. Judge Warren was unmoved. "Mr. Thorne, you have not just stolen money. You have stolen the public's trust. You preyed on their hope for a better future and sold them a lie. You destroyed the lives of your employees, your investors, and the one person who seems to have ever told you the truth, Dr. Reed. You are the architect of your own destruction." Marcus Thorne was sentenced to 45 years in a federal penitentiary. The media, deprived of Bailey, turned Marcus into the ultimate villain. But the question remained: where was Bailey Bishop? The PI Marcus had hired, Gavin Rook, was now being paid by news agencies to find her. He found nothing. She had used no planes, trains, or automobiles registered to her. The Anna Kessler identity was a ghost, a legend. She had simply evaporated. The world media painted her as a folk hero, a mysterious avenger. She was the woman who had brought down an empire with a single letter. But she was nowhere to be found. 9 months, 274 days since she had stepped into that elevator, leaving one life in a shattered penthouse and descending into the unknown of another. Florence, Italy. The afternoon sun, the color of warm honey and old Chianti, spilled across the Piazza Ognissanti. Here the air smelled of roasting coffee and centuries-old stone, a stark welcome contrast to the metallic, sterile scent of old money and cut grass in Greenwich. At a small wrought-iron table in the corner of a cafe, a woman sat sketching the intricate facade of the church across the square. She was slim, dressed in a simple cream-colored linen blouse and dark trousers. Her hair was short, a rich, deep brunette cut in a chic, severe bob that framed a face which, while familiar in its bone structure, was entirely new. The pale, fragile, blonde Bailey Bishop was gone. In her place was Anna Kessler, a woman with a gaze that was not still but settled. Anna Kessler was an art historian, specializing in the restoration of Renaissance frescoes. She spoke Italian with a faint, academic German accent, a fiction she had practiced into fact. She lived in a modest but elegant apartment overlooking the Arno, a place filled with books and light and entirely empty of gilded cages. She had been Bailey for a decade. She had been Anna for 9 months. It was only now that she was beginning to feel like herself. She paused, her sketching, her charcoal pencil hovering over the paper. The last 9 months had not been a vacation. They had been an exorcism. The first few weeks in particular had been a masterclass in controlled terror. She allowed her mind to drift back past the art classes, past the quiet nights to the moment the elevator doors had sealed her in and Marcus out. Flashback: the escape. The descent from the 57th Street penthouse was the longest 60 seconds of her life. She had not pressed the button for the lobby. That was where he would expect her, where he could have security stop her. She had pressed the button for the P2 parking garage. The doors opened to a cool concrete silence. She walked, not ran, to the stairwell. She took the stairs up, not down, emerging into a service corridor she had mapped from the building's blueprints weeks before. It let her out onto 58th Street, a full block away from the grand entrance, a ghost exiting through the walls. She walked 10 blocks east, melting into the Friday night throng of tourists and theater-goers. Bailey Bishop, in her bespoke black dress, would have drawn a car. Anna Kessler, in her infancy, needed to be invisible. Her first stop was a 24-hour gym near Port Authority, a place of transient, anonymous humanity. Her go bag wasn't a bag at all. It was a prepaid locker, secured under a false name 2 months prior. Inside the humid, metallic-smelling locker room, she stripped off the skin of Bailey Bishop. The black dress, the Manolo Blahniks, the delicate diamond earrings, all went into a trash receptacle. She wiped off her subtle, expensive makeup with a rough paper towel. From the locker, she pulled on a pair of nondescript grey trousers, a simple black t-shirt, a pair of running shoes, and a faded denim jacket. The final piece was a wig, shoulder-length, mousy brown. It was unflattering. It was perfect. Bailey Bishop had walked in. A tired, unremarkable commuter walked out. She didn't go to JFK. She didn't go to Grand Central. Any terminal with a federal presence was a risk. Marcus would have her name on a no-fly list within an hour, claiming she was unstable, a danger to herself. Instead, she walked to the Port Authority bus terminal. She paid cash for a one-way ticket on a Greyhound bus to Montreal. The 12-hour ride was a unique, grinding form of psychological torture. Every time the bus slowed, every time it pulled into a dimly lit rest stop in upstate New York, her heart hammered against her ribs. She expected to see his face, or worse, the impassive, brutal face of his investigator, Gavin Rook, stepping onto the bus. She sat in a window seat, her head down, pretending to sleep, her muscles so tense they ached for days. She crossed the Canadian border at 5:00 a.m. The border agent, sleepy and bored, glanced at the American passport she'd presented, one of 3. She'd had prepared this one for a Mary Ann Peters, and waved her through. In Montreal, she went to a small independent bank where she had a small, clean account. She withdrew $10,000 in cash, then went to a different bus station and bought a ticket to Toronto. From Toronto, she finally used her real forged identity. She walked into Pearson International Airport, not as Bailey or Mary Ann, but as Anna Kessler, a German citizen with a pristine passport, a backstory, and a one-way ticket to Geneva, Switzerland. She had spent the next 7 days in a small, clean, anonymous hotel room in Geneva, a stone's throw from the bank that held her new life. Those 7 days were the true test. She had lit the fuse. Now she had to wait for the explosion. She lived on room service, watching the world through a secure, encrypted laptop. She had one open line of communication, a Proton Mail account connected to Mr. Alastair Finch, the quietly ruthless senior partner at her chosen London law firm. She had sent her single pre-arranged message. Subject: the Nightingale is in the nest. The package is live. If you do not receive a stand down command by 0800 GMT, Friday 17th, you are to execute instructions per our agreement. No further contact will be made. For a week, the financial news was silent. Thorn Dynamo stock was at an all-time high. Marcus was on the cover of Forbes again. She felt a sickening lurch. Had she miscalculated? Had he found the breach? Had he somehow covered his tracks? Invalidated her evidence, and was even now sending Rook to hunt her down. She didn't sleep. She just watched the stock ticker. Then on the morning of the 8th day it happened. She was watching Bloomberg when the red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. TRNE. Trading. Halted. Pending news. Bailey's breath hitched. She stared unblinking. The ticker vanished. The screen cut to a breaking news anchor, his face grim. We are getting astonishing unconfirmed reports from New York. Federal agents from the FBI and the SEC are conducting a massive coordinated raid on the Greenwich, Connecticut estate of billionaire Marcus Thorne, as well as the Manhattan headquarters of Thorne Dynamo. The anchor's voice faded. Bailey looked down at her hands. They were shaking a violent, uncontrollable tremor that seemed to come from her very bones. And then she saw it. Her letter. A journalist was holding it up, reading excerpts aloud. A multi-billion-dollar fraud. The Helios core does not work. My name is Bailey Hayes Bishop. She was real. It had worked. She watched mesmerized as the anchors, the pundits, and the financial analysts tried to comprehend the scale of it. They showed the footage Marcus, his face a mask of purple apoplectic rage, being led in handcuffs from his marble-floored hall. They showed Serafina Vance looking cheap and terrified, being taken from her penthouse. Bailey did not feel joy. She did not feel triumph. She felt the catastrophic, agonizing release of a 10-year-old tension. It was the sound of a load-bearing wall finally crumbling. She leaned over the hotel room desk and was physically ill. When it was over, she stood up, washed her face, and deleted the email account. She packed her single bag, walked out of the hotel, and went to the bank. She accessed the Swiss vault, retrieved her remaining funds, and boarded a train. Not to Rome or Paris or London, too obvious. She went to Florence, a city of rebirth, a city where masterpieces were made lost and painstakingly restored. Present day. Piazza Ognissanti. Anna Kessler closed her sketchbook. The memory of the escape had lost its sharp, terrifying edge. It was now just a story. A waiter set a small, folded newspaper on her table. La Repubblica. She nodded her thanks. The headline was stark, the photo all too familiar. Marcus gaunt and grey, his bespoke suit replaced by an ill-fitting prison jumpsuit, stared blankly from the front page. The Wall Street Typhoon sentenced to 45 years. She read the article dispassionately. It detailed his final weeping plea for mercy. It detailed the judge's blistering condemnation. It mentioned the thousands of lives ruined, the pension funds obliterated. It mentioned her la moglie scomparsa, the vanished wife. The mysterious, heroic whistleblower who had brought him down and disappeared, a modern-day folk legend. She felt a flicker of nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction. He was just a variable in a solved equation. Her encrypted phone, a device she used only once a month, vibrated on the table. A new message. It was from Alistair Finch. Subject Phase 2. Complete. Madam, the U.S. government has finalized the SEC Victim Compensation Fund. As per your irrevocable directive executed the day of your departure, your entire spousal asset claim, $84.5 million, after liquidation and taxes, has been anonymously endowed. The Evan Reed Foundation for Technical Truth is now capitalized in perpetuity. Its first action enclosed was a success. We await any further instructions, though we understand none are forthcoming. Be well. AF. Her fingers steady now opened the attachment. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a small, obscure press clipping from a Californian tech journal. Young engineer wins suit against biotech firm. The story was simple. A 28-year-old woman, a junior engineer named Priya Sharma, had been fired for refusing to sign off on falsified data for a new medical device. She had been blacklisted, threatened, and was drowning in legal fees. Then an anonymous foundation had stepped in, the Reed Foundation. It had provided her with a legal team that outmatched the corporations. It had protected her from media harassment, and it had funded her defense until she had not only won her wrongful termination suit, but had forced a federal inquiry into the company's practices. Anna closed the phone. That was her victory. Not Marcus in chains. Not her name in the headlines. This quiet, unknown engineer who had told the truth and had not been destroyed for it. The money Marcus had stolen, the money he had used to build his lies, was now being used to protect the truth. It was the most perfect forensic justice she could imagine. Bailey Bishop had not done it for revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, passionate act. This had been an audit. This was the balancing of the books. Marcus, Serafina, Arthur Langdon. They were just rounding errors she had to correct. She looked at the newspaper photo of her former husband one last time. He wasn't a monster. He was just a decimal point in the wrong place, a miscalculation that had threatened the integrity of the entire system. And Bailey Hayes, the forensic accountant, had simply finally corrected the balance sheet. Anna Kessler paid for her coffee in cash and gathered her sketchbook. She slid her sunglasses on, hiding her eyes, but not her presence. She stood, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to be invisible. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was simply Anna. She had her work, her art, and her freedom. She walked out of the cafe and into the warm, golden light of the piazza. She did not disappear into the crowd. She joined it. Bailey Bishop's story is a masterclass in calculated consequences. She proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and that the truth, when weaponized correctly, can topple any empire. But what do you think? Was Bailey a hero? A whistleblower who served justice, or was she a vengeful woman who took the law into her own hands? Did Marcus and Serafina get what they deserved? We want to hear your take on this incredible real-life drama. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you love stories of complex characters, shocking twists, and justice served cold, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that are stranger than fiction. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. The polished mahogany door clicked shut behind her, a sound as final as a coffin lid. Rain lashed against the cold, unforgiving stone of the mansion she once called home, mingling with the tears she refused to let fall. In one hand, she gripped the handle of a single suitcase, packed not by her, but for her. In the other, a piece of paper, a severance package for a decade of her life, an insult disguised as a settlement. His last words still echoed in the stormy air, colder than the wind that whipped her hair across her face. "I need an heir, not a placeholder." And just like that, her world wasn't just broken. It was obliterated. The chandeliers in the dining room dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a fractured, brilliant light over the scene. Adeline had always loved them. She'd chosen them herself on a trip to Venice,
a memory that now felt like it belonged to another woman. Across the vast, immaculately polished rosewood table, Damien swirled a ruby-red Cabernet in his glass, the liquid catching the light, dark and heavy like blood. He hadn't looked at her, not really looked at her, all evening. His gaze was distant, his jaw set with a tension that coiled in the air between them, thick and suffocating. For 10 years, this opulence had been her reality, but tonight it felt like a beautifully constructed prison, and she was just beginning to see the bars. They had met when she was a fledgling art curator, and he was a man whose ambition was a tangible force, a gravity that pulled everyone into his orbit. He had swept her off her feet with a ferocity that left her breathless, promising a world she'd only read about in novels. He built an empire in speculative tech, and she had been his partner, his confidant, the quiet, steadying hand at his back. She'd hosted the dinners, charmed the investors, and sacrificed her own career to build his. Their life was a fortress of wealth and power, but there was one crack in its foundation, a fissure that had widened into a chasm over the years. They couldn't have a child. 3 rounds of IVF, countless specialists, and a string of heartbreaking failures had left a quiet sadness lingering in the vast, empty rooms of their mansion. Adeline had made her peace with it, suggesting adoption, suggesting a life just for them. Damien, however, had seen it as a personal failure, an unacceptable flaw in his perfect dynasty. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice devoid of the warmth she once cherished. It was the voice he used in the boardroom, the one that terminated contracts and dismantled competitors. Adeline placed her fork down, the delicate clink of silver against porcelain sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. "You've been distant for months, Damien. I know something's wrong." He didn't soften. He didn't offer comfort. He simply slid his phone across the table. On the screen was the image of a woman, young, beautiful, with a serene smile, and her hands resting protectively on a visibly pregnant stomach. Adeline's breath hitched. The woman was Claire, Damien's new executive assistant, a girl she'd met twice and thought nothing of. "Her name is Claire," Damien stated, as if presenting a quarterly report. "She's 26 weeks pregnant. It's a boy." The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds, meaningless vibrations in the air. Then they landed, each one a physical blow. A boy. The son he'd always wanted. The heir he believed she had denied him. The air rushed from her lungs, and the crystal chandelier above seemed to sway. She felt a strange, dizzying detachment, as if she were floating above her own body, watching a scene from a tragic film. "How could you?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat, raw and broken. "It wasn't personal, Adeline. It was a matter of legacy," he said, his voice clipped and utterly devoid of remorse. "This company, this name, it needs to continue. You and we failed on that front. I've made a new arrangement." An arrangement. As if she were a faulty piece of machinery being replaced. The years of love, laughter, and shared dreams were reduced to a failed business transaction. The dam of her composure finally broke, and a hot, furious wave of betrayal washed over her. "An arrangement?" she repeated, her voice rising, trembling with a decade of suppressed frustrations and fresh agony. "I gave you everything. My life, my dreams. I stood by you when you had nothing but a crazy idea in a garage, and you call this an arrangement?" He was unmoved. "I've been more than fair. My lawyer has drawn up a final settlement. It's generous. You'll be comfortable." He gestured to the doorway. Claire was standing there, her expression a mixture of timid triumph and pity. It was the pity that cut Adeline the deepest. "Get out!" Adeline breathed, her gaze fixed on the woman carrying her husband's child. "I'm afraid it is you who will be leaving," Damien said, his tone final. "Claire and the baby will be living here. This is their home now." He stood up and walked to the grand foyer, where a single suitcase, her suitcase, stood waiting by the door. He'd planned this, every last, cruel detail. He opened the door, letting the cold, rainy night air rush into their warm, perfect home. He handed her an envelope. "Sign it. Have your lawyer look at it. I don't care. A car is waiting to take you to a hotel. My security will escort you." She stood frozen, the warmth of the room leaching from her skin. The life she knew was being surgically excised, and the man she loved was holding the scalpel. She looked from his cold, implacable face to Claire's gentle, pregnant form, and she understood. She was being replaced, erased. She walked toward the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't look back at the crystal lights, the polished floors, the life she had built. She couldn't. As she stepped out into the storm, the weight of his betrayal was a physical burden, heavier than the suitcase in her hand, heavier than the world. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The floral-patterned bedspread was thin and scratchy, a universe away from the 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets she had woken up in that morning. Adeline sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the generous settlement papers lying untouched beside her. $1 million. It sounded like a fortune to the woman she used to be, the art curator with a small apartment and big dreams. But to the wife of Damien Sterling, the man whose net worth was in the billions, it was pocket change. It was hush money. A tip left on the table after a 10-year meal. For 3 days, she didn't leave the room. The television flickered with meaningless images, the sounds a dull drone that couldn't penetrate the roaring in her head. She replayed that final scene over and over, dissecting every word, every cold glance. Legacy. He had said it was about legacy, but it wasn't. It was about his ego, a fragile, monstrous thing that she had spent a decade carefully tending to. She had been the perfect corporate wife, elegant and intelligent, a beautiful accessory that made him look good. But she had failed in her one biological duty, and for a man like Damien, that was unforgivable. Her mind drifted further back to the early days, the tiny apartment that was always filled with the smell of coffee and takeout as they worked late into the night on his business plan. The way he'd hold her and whisper, "It's you and me against the world, Addie." When had that man disappeared? Or had he ever really existed? Was he just a phantom she had constructed in her own mind? A projection of what she wanted him to be? The thought was terrifying. It meant her entire marriage, her entire adult life, was a lie. She thought of her own past, a childhood spent in the shadow of a domineering father who measured love in achievements. She had escaped that life only to find herself in a different kind of cage, a gilded one, but a cage nonetheless. She had made herself small to make Damien feel big. She had buried her own instincts, her own ambitions, so as not to threaten his. And this was her reward. On the 4th day, her phone buzzed. It had been silent for so long. Their friends, his friends, had all disappeared, their loyalty bought and paid for. It was a number she hadn't dialed in years. Sophia, her younger sister. They'd had a falling out 5 years ago, a stupid argument about Damien's arrogance that had spiraled into a bitter silence. Sophia had seen something in him that Adeline had refused to acknowledge. "He doesn't see you, Addie," she had warned. "He sees a beautiful reflection of himself." With trembling fingers, Adeline answered, "Hello? Addie? Oh, thank God." Sophia's voice was a flood of relief and concern. "I saw it online, some gossip site. I've been trying to reach you. Where are you?" Adeline broke. The carefully constructed wall of numbness crumbled, and a decade of pain and a lifetime of insecurity came pouring out in a torrent of sobs. She told Sophia everything. The dinner, Claire, the suitcase, the motel. She cried for the life she had lost, for the woman she had ceased to be, and for the sister she had pushed away. Sophia listened patiently, without a single "I told you so." When Adeline was finished, her voice hoarse and her body shaking, Sophia's reply was simple and immediate. "I'm booking a flight. Tell me where you are. You're not alone in this anymore." 2 days later, Sophia arrived, a whirlwind of fierce, protective energy. She took one look at the grim motel room, at her sister's gaunt face and hollow eyes, and took charge. She tore up the settlement papers, letting the pieces drift into the cheap wastebasket like confetti at a funeral. "You are not signing that," she said, her voice steel. "That's not a settlement. That's an admission of defeat. We're not defeated." Sophia took Adeline to her small, cozy apartment in a city hundreds of miles away from the life Adeline had known. It was filled with books, half-finished paintings, and the scent of freshly brewed tea. It was a home, not a showroom. For the first time in a week, Adeline felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a tiny, fragile ember of warmth. While Adeline slowly began to heal, piecing together the shattered fragments of her identity, Sophia started digging. She was a journalist, tenacious and resourceful. She read every article ever written about Damian Sterling, every fawning business profile, and every glossy magazine spread. She was looking for a crack, a vulnerability, anything. "Men like Damian," she told Adeline one evening, "they don't build empires without making enemies. They don't get that rich by being fair. Somewhere he cut a corner. Somewhere there's a body buried. Weeks turned into a month." The initial, all-consuming grief began to recede, leaving behind the hard, cold bedrock of anger. Adeline's world was no longer the four walls of a motel room. It was the comforting chaos of Sophia's apartment. She started cooking again, simple meals that filled the space with warmth. She read, she walked, and she slowly started to feel the edges of her own self again, the person she was before she became Mrs. Damian Sterling. But the anger remained, a low, constant hum beneath the surface. It was fueled by the tabloids Sophia sometimes left out, a calculated cruelty to keep the fire in Adeline's belly stoked. Billionaire Damian Sterling and expectant mother radiant at charity gala? They were building their new life on the rubble of hers, and the world was applauding them for it. One rainy afternoon, Adeline was sorting through the meager contents of the suitcase Damian had packed for her. It was a bizarre collection of designer clothes and expensive jewelry, items he thought defined her. At the bottom, tucked into the lining, her fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. It was an old, leather-bound moleskin notebook. She didn't recognize it at first. Then, a memory surfaced. It was from years ago, in the garage apartment. Damian had used it for his initial brainstorming, scribbling down equations, market projections, and fragments of code. He'd moved on to sleeker, digital methods long ago, and this relic of his humble beginnings must have been forgotten, packed by a maid who simply cleared out a dusty drawer. She opened it, the pages smelling of old paper and ambition. Most of it was the technical jargon she'd never fully understood. But tucked into a flap at the back was a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of a signed agreement, a partnership dissolution. The signature alongside Damian's was one she didn't recognize: Nathan Hayes. The document stated that Nathan Hayes was relinquishing all claims and intellectual property related to their joint project, codenamed Prometheus, in exchange for a one-time payment of $50,000. The date on the document was just 3 months before Damian had secured his first round of major funding, the funding that had launched his empire. Prometheus. That was the name of the core algorithm that powered Sterling Innovations. Damien had always told everyone he developed it alone in a flash of solitary genius. He'd built his entire mythos on that story. But this document suggested otherwise. He'd had a partner he'd bought out for a pittance right before striking gold. "Sophia," Adeline called out, her voice trembling slightly. "You need to see this." Sophia read the document, her eyes narrowing. "Nathan Hayes," she murmured, already typing the name into her laptop. "If this is what I think it is, this isn't just a skeleton in his closet. This is the whole graveyard." The initial searches were fruitless. There was no Nathan Hayes in the tech world, no social media presence. It was a digital dead end. But Sophia was a journalist. She knew how to dig deeper. She pulled public records, property deeds, and old university alumni lists. After 2 days of relentless searching, she found him. Or what was left of him. Nathan Hayes had died 7 years ago. A reported suicide. He had been struggling with depression and financial ruin after a series of failed ventures. He left behind a wife and a daughter. His widow, Sarah Hayes, now worked as a librarian in a small town in Oregon. "Oh my God," Adeline breathed, looking at the faded photograph of Nathan on a memorial website. He had a kind, intelligent face. He looked like a man who could have been Damien's friend, before Damien decided friendship was a liability. "This is it, Addie," Sophia said, her voice low and intense. "This is the weak point. Damien didn't just outsmart a partner, he erased him. He built his legacy on a man's grave. The story he told the world is a lie." A sudden, chilling thought occurred to Adeline. The settlement, the $1 million, it wasn't just an insult, it was a strategy. By offering her a settlement, Damien was creating a paper trail that made their split look like a standard, albeit acrimonious, divorce. If she signed, she'd be legally bound by a non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't about being generous, it was about ensuring her silence. He wasn't just getting rid of a barren wife, he was getting rid of a witness. She had been there in the early days. She might not have understood the code, but she remembered the late-night arguments, the hushed phone calls, the name Nathan being spoken in anger. He was afraid of what she might remember. The hum of anger inside her sharpened into a single, clear note of purpose. This was no longer just about her pain, her betrayal. It was about Nathan Hayes. It was about the life he never got to live, the family he left behind. Damien hadn't just thrown her out. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet grace for weakness. He thought she was just an accessory he could discard. He was about to find out how wrong he was. "Find me a lawyer," Adeline said, her voice steady and cold. "Not a divorce lawyer, a shark? Someone who isn't afraid of Damien Sterling." Finding the right lawyer felt like searching for a ghost. The top-tier corporate law firms in the city were all tangled in Damien's web. They had either represented Sterling Innovations in the past or desperately wanted to. Taking on a case against him would be professional suicide. They were offered retainers far larger than Adeline could ever afford, only to politely decline after a single phone call, their hushed tones suggesting a warning had been delivered from on high. Damien was protecting his kingdom, and his influence was a long, dark shadow. It was Sophia, through an old journalism contact, who finally found a name: Leo Roman. He wasn't on the top floor of a skyscraper. His office was on the 4th floor of a creaky pre-war building, the kind with a cage elevator and radiators that hissed like angry snakes. The sign on his door was simple: L. Roman, Escors, specializing in financial justice. Leo was not what Adeline expected. He was a man in his late 50s with a weary face, a rumpled suit, and eyes that seemed to have seen the very worst of human greed. His office was a chaotic mess of paper. Stacks of legal briefs, depositions, and financial records teetered precariously on every surface. But beneath the disarray, there was a sense of fierce, focused intelligence. He wasn't a corporate lawyer. He was a brawler, a street fighter who had spent his career representing whistleblowers, defrauded employees, and small-time inventors crushed by corporate behemoths. He had a reputation for taking impossible cases and, more often than not, winning them through sheer, relentless attrition. He listened to Adeline's story without interruption, his gaze fixed on her face, assessing her. He steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. When she finished, placing the copy of the partnership dissolution on his cluttered desk, he finally spoke. "Damien Sterling," Leo said, his voice a low rumble. "I know the name. He's a predator dressed in a $1,000 suit. But he's insulated. He has the best legal team money can buy. To go after him, you don't just need a smoking gun. You need an arsenal. This document is a start. It's a good start, but it's not enough." "What do you need?" Adeline asked, her voice steady. The timid woman from the mansion was gone. In her place was someone focused, someone with nothing left to lose. "Proof," Leo said. "Proof that this Prometheus algorithm was substantially Nathan Hayes' work. Proof that Damien coerced him into signing this. Right now, this is just a piece of paper. Damien's lawyers will paint Hayes as a disgruntled minor partner who cashed out too early. They'll paint you as a bitter, vengeful ex-wife. We need more." The search began. It was a slow, painstaking process. Leo filed an initial discovery motion that was immediately buried in an avalanche of legal challenges from Damien's team. They were building a wall of paper to slow them down. Meanwhile, Sophia flew to Oregon to meet with Sarah Hayes. The widow was hesitant at first, the wound still raw even after 7 years. She described a husband who had grown paranoid and despondent, talking about being cheated, about his life's work being stolen. He had fallen into a deep depression he never recovered from. But she had no hard evidence, only the painful memories of a broken man. She did, however, have a key. A key to a storage unit Nathan had rented in the final months of his life. He had told her it was just old university junk. After he died, she had kept paying the bill, unable to bring herself to sort through the remnants of his shattered dreams. Sophia convinced her to open it. The unit was cold and damp, filled with dusty boxes of textbooks and old computer equipment. But in the back, behind a stack of obsolete monitors, was a heavy, locked metal footlocker. Leo, using the legal authority of representing the Hayes estate, had a locksmith open it. Inside was Nathan Hayes' ghost. There were hard drives, zip disks, and stacks of notebooks filled with handwritten code. It was a meticulous archive of his work, his entire creative process from conception to near completion of the Prometheus algorithm. Most importantly, there was a log of his correspondence with Damien, emails he had printed out, detailing their collaboration, their shared excitement, and then the growing tension. The final emails were heartbreaking. Nathan begging Damien to reconsider, accusing him of locking him out of their shared servers, of changing the code and claiming it as his own. Damien's replies were cold, dismissive, threatening legal action if Nathan didn't accept the buyout. But the real treasure was a small, unassuming digital audio recorder. On it was a single recording, made on the day Nathan signed the dissolution agreement. It was a conversation between him and Damien. Damien's voice was smooth, persuasive, and utterly chilling. He could be heard talking about Nathan's mounting debts, his wife's medical bills, the precariousness of their situation. He framed the $50,000 buyout not as a betrayal, but as a lifeline. "Take the deal, Nate," Damien's voice echoed from the small speaker. "It's a sure thing. This startup world, it's a gamble. 99% of them fail. This way you walk away with something. You can take care of your family." It was coercion, dressed up as concern. Back in Leo's office, they listened to the recording in stunned silence. This was it. This was the weapon. "We have him," Leo said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "This is fraud, coercion, and the foundation of a wrongful death suit. We can ruin him." But as Adeline listened to the desperation in Nathan's voice and the cold calculation in her husband's, she knew that simply ruining him wasn't enough. Money wouldn't bring Nathan back. She looked at the schematic of Sterling Innovations' corporate structure that Leo had pinned to a corkboard. It was a vast, sprawling empire. An empire built on a lie. An empire he cherished more than any person. It wasn't his money she wanted. It was his legacy. The very thing he had destroyed her for. "No," Adeline said quietly, her eyes fixed on the board. "We're not going to sue him. Not yet. We're going to take it all." Leo looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his weary eyes. He was seeing the same steely resolve he'd seen in 100 whistleblowers and victims before. He was seeing a fighter. The strategy shifted from a legal assault to a corporate one. It was audacious, bordering on impossible. Leo, invigorated by a challenge he hadn't seen in years, embraced it with a feral glee. "He thinks he's a king?" Leo growled, pacing his cluttered office. "The only way to dethrone a king is to turn his own court against him." Their plan was twofold. First, they needed leverage, the kind that would make the board of Sterling Innovations and their investors panic. Second, they needed capital, a significant amount, to execute a hostile takeover. The audio recording was their leverage. The capital was a far greater challenge. Adeline sold everything she had left from her old life. The jewelry, the designer bags, even the shares in a small art gallery she had co-owned before her marriage. It was a respectable sum, but a drop in the ocean compared to what they needed. Their break came from an unexpected place. Leo, using his network of contacts, found another victim of Damien's ambition. A man named George Croft, a seasoned venture capitalist who had been one of Damien's earliest mentors. Damien had pushed him out of a lucrative deal years ago, using inside information to undercut him and steal the opportunity. George, now semi-retired and nursing a decade-old grudge, had been waiting for a chance at payback. The meeting took place in a private club that smelled of old leather and older money. George Croft was a portly man, with a sharp mind and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to the audio recording of Damien and Nathan, his expression hardening with each word. "That's the Damien I remember," George said, swirling a glass of scotch. "A shark who was never satisfied with just a piece of the pie. He wanted the whole damn bakery." He looked at Adeline, his gaze assessing. "This is a long shot, young lady. You're going up against an army." "I'm aware," Adeline replied, her voice calm and even. "But he's arrogant. He won't see this coming, especially not from me. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks I'm irrelevant." George smiled, a slow, predatory grin. "Arrogance, the fatal flaw of so many great men." "All right, I'm in. I'll put together a consortium. We'll create a series of shell corporations to start buying up Sterling Innovations stock. We'll move quietly, a percentage point at a time. He won't even notice until it's too late." While George and his consortium began their silent financial siege, Adeline and Leo prepared the narrative. They knew they couldn't just drop the evidence. They had to control the story, to frame it in a way that left Damien with no escape. They prepared a meticulously documented dossier, complete with Nathan Hayes' notebooks, the printed emails, the audio recording, and a detailed financial analysis showing that nearly 80% of the company's profits could be traced back to the stolen Prometheus algorithm. As their plan gained momentum, Damien began to feel the pressure, though he didn't yet know its source. He became increasingly paranoid and volatile. Adeline, through Sophia's continued monitoring of the press, saw the change. He looked strained in photos. There were rumors of shouting matches in the boardroom, of him firing senior staff for minor infractions. The pressure was making the cracks in his perfect facade begin to show, and he started to lash out. Adeline found the tires on her car slashed one morning. Leo received a visit from 2 large men with an unspoken warning to drop the case. A key investor in George's consortium suddenly pulled out, citing unforeseen financial difficulties that felt anything but coincidental. Damien was fighting back, using the brutish, intimidating tactics of a cornered animal. But instead of frightening Adeline, it hardened her. Each act of aggression only served to reinforce the truth of who he was. This was the real Damien, the man who lurked beneath the charming, polished exterior. She was no longer fighting the ghost of the man she had loved. She was fighting the monster that had been there all along. Her internal struggle was not one of fear, but of morality. She was becoming something she never thought she would be: ruthless, calculating, and patient. She was wielding secrets and other people's money like weapons, preparing to destroy a man's life. Some nights she lay awake, the voice of the old Adeline whispering in her ear, asking if this was truly justice or just a more sophisticated form of revenge. But then she would think of Nathan Hayes, of his widow Sarah and the daughter who grew up without a father. She would think of the condescending pity in Claire's eyes and the cold, dismissive finality in Damien's. And she knew she couldn't stop. She had to see this through. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person Damien had ever stepped on to build his crooked throne. She was the ghost of all his past sins, and she was coming to collect. The 8-month mark of Claire's pregnancy coincided with the peak of Damien's paranoia. The pressure of the silent stock acquisition and the whispers of a legal challenge he couldn't identify were taking their toll. The charming, attentive partner she had fallen for was gone, replaced by a man who was short-tempered, suspicious, and obsessed with control. The mansion no longer felt like a palace. It felt like a high-security prison. He had her followed. He checked her phone. He questioned every call, every expenditure. He saw threats in every shadow. Claire had entered into this relationship with naive, star-struck eyes. Damien was powerful, brilliant, and he had chosen her. She believed his story about his cold, unhappy marriage. She believed he loved her. She believed the child they were having was the start of a beautiful new family. But the man she was living with now was not the man from her dreams. His cruelty, once a trait she knew he reserved for business rivals, was now leaking into their life. He would make casually cutting remarks about her weight gain, her simplistic view of the world, her choice of friends. He was isolating her, just as he had isolated Adeline. One evening, after a particularly tense day where a major investor had liquidated a huge block of shares without explanation, Damien came home in a rage. He had been drinking. He found Claire in the nursery, softly folding baby clothes. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled, his voice slurring slightly. "Just getting the room ready," she said, startled by his tone. "This is all your fault," he muttered, pacing the room. "If it wasn't for this whole situation, she'd have just taken the money and disappeared. But no, you had to be the picture of domestic bliss. You had to be flaunted. It made her angry. It made her fight back." Claire was confused and frightened. "Fight back? Who? Adeline?" Damien let out a bitter laugh. "Her. The ghost. Someone is trying to ruin me, Claire. Someone is digging into things. Things from a long time ago. She must be behind it. The vengeful wife. It's so predictable." He suddenly stopped pacing and grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Did you talk to her? Did she contact you?" "No, of course not! Damien, you're hurting me!" she cried, trying to pull away. He released her abruptly, a flicker of something, disgust or self-loathing in his eyes. He looked around the perfect nursery, at the tiny clothes and stuffed animals. "Legacy," he spat, the word tasting like poison. "I blew up my life for a legacy, and now I have a target on my back and a child on the way with a woman who can't even comprehend the world I live in." He stormed out, leaving Claire trembling among the soft, pastel-colored decorations. In that moment, the illusion shattered completely. He didn't love her. He was using her. She and their unborn son were just pieces in his grand game, a move he had made to secure his dynasty. And now that the game was threatened, they had become a liability. For the first time, she felt a profound, chilling kinship with the woman she had replaced. She finally understood that Adeline wasn't the villain of Damien's story. She was his first victim. Fear for her future and the future of her child consumed her. She thought about leaving, but he controlled her finances, her home, her life. She was trapped. A few days later, driven by a desperate need to understand the danger she was in, she did something reckless. She used Damien's password, a combination of his mother's birthday and the name of his first dog, a detail he'd once shared in a rare moment of sentimentality, to access his private server. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she found a hidden, encrypted folder. The password hint was NH Folly. She thought of the way he'd been muttering about the past, and a name from a news article about his early career came to mind: Nathan Hayes. She typed it in, and the folder opened. Inside was everything. The original partnership agreement with Nathan, scans of Nathan's early code, and a file labeled Contingency. It was an audio file. She clicked play and heard a voice she recognized from the news, Damien's. But it was a recording of the conversation he'd had with Nathan Hayes, the one where he coerced him into signing away his life's work. Damien had kept a copy, as insurance, as a trophy. She didn't know, but listening to his cold, calculated manipulation of a desperate man made her feel sick. She now held the proof of the crime that was the source of his paranoia. She knew, with absolute certainty, that if he discovered what she had found, she would be in real danger. He wouldn't hesitate to remove her from the equation, just as he had removed Nathan and Adeline. With shaking hands, she copied the file onto a tiny, encrypted USB drive. She didn't know what Adeline was planning, but she knew that woman was the only other person who understood the truth. Using a prepaid burner phone she bought with cash from an ATM, she found a secure, anonymous email service. She sent a single, unsigned message to a private contact address for Leo Roman's firm, an address Sophia had once mentioned in a news article about whistleblowers. The message contained only 3 things: a time, a place for a dead drop, and the words, "I have his contingency file, the proof you need. He is not the man you think he is." She was no longer a pawn in his game. She was changing the board. The day of the annual general meeting of Sterling Innovations was a major event in the financial world. It was held in a cavernous, state-of-the-art auditorium, packed with shareholders, board members, and the press. This year was particularly significant. Damien was set to announce a monumental merger with a European tech giant, a deal that would make his company an untouchable global behemoth. It was to be the crowning achievement of his career, the final, unassailable brick in his legacy. He stood at the podium, basking in the applause, the picture of power and success. The paranoia of the past few months had been temporarily suppressed by the intoxicating thrill of this ultimate victory. He launched into his speech, his voice booming with confidence, painting a glorious picture of future profits and market domination. He was at the absolute zenith of his power, a king addressing his loyal subjects. He didn't notice the quiet, unassuming woman who slipped into a reserved seat in the back row. Adeline. She looked different. The soft, deferential demeanor was gone, replaced by a still, formidable composure. She was not here as a victim. She was here as an executioner. As Damien prepared to introduce the CEO of the European firm for the final signing, a single email was sent from Leo Roman's office. It went to every board member, every major shareholder, and every journalist in the room. The subject line was simple: "The true foundation of Sterling Innovations. The email contained a link to a secure, password-protected website. A moment later, a second email provided the password: Nathan Hayes. On stage, Damien's tablet, which was projecting his speech notes, flickered. A message appeared on the screen, visible only to him. "Check your email. Your legacy is over." He paled. A low murmur began to ripple through the auditorium as people opened their phones and laptops. The murmur grew into a wave of shocked gasps. On the website, they found everything: Nathan Hayes' notebooks, the scanned emails, the financial breakdown of the company's reliance on the Prometheus algorithm. And at the very top, an embedded audio player with the full, unedited recording of Damien coercing Nathan Hayes into signing away his future. Damien stared out at the sea of faces, no longer looking at him with admiration, but with horror and contempt. His confident smile faltered, replaced by a mask of disbelief. "These are baseless allegations," he stammered into the microphone, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. "This is a smear campaign by a disgruntled, by a person with a vendetta." But it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. The CEO of the European company, who had been waiting in the wings, was now being hurried away by his aides, his face a thunderous mask of fury. The deal was dead. And then the final blow. Adeline stood up from her seat in the back. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to her. She walked calmly and deliberately down the aisle, not towards the stage, but towards the chairman of the board, an elderly, distinguished man named Arthur Vance. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone of a journalist who rushed to her side. "My name is Adeline Roberts. My former name was Sterling. For the past 6 months, a consortium of investors, represented by Mr. George Croft and myself, has been acquiring a controlling interest in this company. As of this morning, we hold 51% of the voting shares." A collective gasp went through the room. Damien looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "We have the votes," Adeline continued, her gaze finally locking with Damien's across the room. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, resolute finality. "And we are calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in CEO Damien Sterling. We are voting to remove him from his position and from the board, effective immediately." It was a corporate coup, executed with surgical precision in the most public forum imaginable. Damien was speechless, his face ashen. He was being dismantled piece by piece in front of the entire world. The board, seeing the irrefutable evidence and the sudden dramatic shift in power, scrambled to save themselves and the company. The vote was a mere formality. Damien Sterling, the untouchable king of tech, was thrown out of his own kingdom. As security guards, with apologetic but firm expressions, approached the stage to escort him out, his eyes found Adeline's one last time. In them, she saw not hatred, but a dawning, terrifying understanding. She hadn't just taken his company, she had taken his name. She had taken his story. She had taken the only thing he ever truly loved, his legacy. And she had done it without raising her voice, without shedding a tear. She had simply exposed the truth. In the aftermath, the financial world was in an uproar. Sterling Innovations' stock plummeted, but only briefly. The new controlling interest, led by Adeline and George Croft, moved swiftly to stabilize the company. Adeline, in a move that shocked everyone, did not take the title of CEO. She became the chairwoman of the board, the architect of the company's new future. Her first act was to issue a public apology to Sarah Hayes and her daughter. She flew to Oregon to meet them in person, not for a photo opportunity, but for a quiet, private conversation. She established a foundation in Nathan Hayes' name, funded by a significant portion of the company's annual profits, dedicated to supporting young, struggling inventors and their families. The company itself was rebranded. Sterling Innovations became Prometheus Labs, a name that honored its true creator. Adeline didn't just want to erase Damien, she wanted to correct the past. Richard was left with a fraction of his former wealth and a reputation that was utterly toxic. He was a social and professional pariah. The merger was dead, his friends had vanished, and his name was synonymous with fraud. He was a ghost in the world he once ruled. A few weeks after the takeover, Adeline received a request for a meeting. It was from Claire. They met in a neutral, quiet cafe. Claire was visibly nervous, her son now a newborn, sleeping peacefully in a carrier beside her. "I wanted to thank you," Claire said, her voice soft. "And to apologize. I was foolish. I believed a story he told me, and I never stopped to think about the person on the other side of it." Adeline looked at the young woman, and she felt no anger, only a strange sense of empathy. Claire was just another person who had been dazzled and then discarded by Damien. "He has a way of making people believe what he wants them to," Adeline said simply. She then made Claire an offer. A trust fund would be established for her son, enough to provide for his education and his future, completely independent of Damien. It came with one condition. The child was to be raised with Claire's last name, with no connection to the Sterling legacy. He was an innocent, and he deserved a life free from the poison of his father's name. Claire agreed, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. She was being given a second chance, a gift of grace she never expected. The story ends a year later. A news report is playing on a television in a cheap, lonely bar. It features Adeline Roberts, the chairwoman of Prometheus Labs, announcing a new scholarship program for underprivileged students in STEM. She is poised, respected, and radiant. Watching the screen is a man with hollow eyes and a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. It is Damien. He is a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that has forgotten him, watching the woman he threw away build a better empire on the ashes of his. Adeline is not in a boardroom. She is walking along a wind-swept beach, the same one where Damien proposed to her all those years ago. The air is clean and salty. For a long time, she had thought her story was a tragedy, but she now knows it was a story of liberation. She had lost a gilded cage, and in doing so, had found her own strength, her own purpose, her own soul. She was finally free. Adeline chose to build something new from the wreckage of her past. She offered grace to the woman who helped destroy her marriage, and chose justice over simple, bitter revenge. But the path she walked was a difficult one, forcing her to become as ruthless and calculating as the man who wronged her. So, we want to ask you, the viewer, if you were in her shoes, with the power to utterly destroy the person who shattered your life, what would you have done? Would you have been as merciful? Let us know in the comments below.